Now let's get into what hardware I recommend for beginners. I know this is probably one of the main concerns you have when starting out, as you want to get the best value for your investment. So I know there's a ton of options on the market right now, and my personal buying style is to get the highest quality possible given my budget. So I look for the best brands and then try to figure out what is most important to me, because there's always different price points between what either the storage capacities are or whether there's Wi-Fi and things like that. So in this market, I would say for tablets for your desktop PC, Wacom is still the leader. And for me, when it comes to tablets, I really think the iPad Pro is still the best. The difference between the two, I'm sure you've already thought about for yourself, is do you want to be more mobile, or are you looking for a desktop solution for an existing computer? Obviously, if you already have a laptop that can be powerful enough to run Photoshop, then it's easier and cheaper to just get a tablet to get at least familiar with digital painting. On the other hand, if you're starting from scratch and you want something that suits all of your needs, an iPad might be appropriate if you don't do that much computing work and you actually just want a digital painting tool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the hardware that I use. Of course, you should do your own research, but this is just after a lot of research on my part where I ended up with. So for the desktop, I use a MacBook Pro, but since Photoshop runs on either PC or Mac, you can use either one, and I'm not going to get into whether Macs are better than PCs. But I will say that I use an iPhone, iPad, and MacBook Pro, and as much as I want to get out of the Apple dominant system, I will say the AirDrop capabilities between the three really do help a lot in streamlining my workflow and being able to transfer files back and forth in a really quick way. But when I started out, I was using their intro-level bamboo tablet, which has been replaced by their Wacom Intuos Art. It was totally fine as a beginner, and I think it was actually nice to kind of work off of something simpler and something I didn't feel like I invested a ton of money in, so the pressure was a little bit less there. It's also super light, which is great for transportation. However, I will say that when I use it now, I can definitely see the difference between the pressure sensitivity and tilt and the difference it makes in the detail of my work. If you use vectors and illustrate in Illustrator, then I really don't think it matters. Although the stylus's physical weight does make a surprising difference when using it in terms of comfort and hand fatigue. However, I do think that given all the positive reviews on this starter tablet, it's not a bad choice for a beginner, and you shouldn't feel that you can't do any of the things I'll show you in this class because you got the starter version. For those of you who are looking for a slightly better option, I currently use the Wacom Intuos Pro in both the small and medium size. I keep one at my house and the other one at my office. Functionally, they are totally the same in my experience, so if you want to save $100, you can totally do the same things on the smaller size. Plus, the small one is a lot more transportable and takes up less space on your desk, so that can be a pro depending on your situation. That said, if I had to just pick one, I would still go for the medium size because I find that the larger space just helps me have a freer workflow, and sometimes on the small one I will find that I have to move my hand and start all over in the positioning, and it does kind of break up my stream. Now let's move on to the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil. The iPad Pro really is amazing for digital drawing and painting, especially for those of you who are just starting out, because it's so intuitive. I've tried Microsoft Surface Pro, and the pen pressure sensitivity and tilt are just not as good for digital painting purposes right now, at least in my opinion. I do think, and when it comes to size, on the iPad Pro, that bigger is better, especially if you're looking to do kind of more complicated digital paintings and not just, for example, lettering. But of course, work with your budget. I basically have the largest iPad Pro size available, but then the cheapest version of that. So it's Wi-Fi only and the smallest storage capacity, because when I was choosing, I felt that it was the most important in terms of weighing my budget options of having the larger size, but I actually don't really need that much storage space because I tend to just move the files onto my computer, store it on the cloud, and then I can take it off my iPad. I also don't do that many other things on my iPad, so I don't have a ton of other apps or take a lot of photos or videos. So the storage is really all basically digital paintings. That said, if you needed to use this as your primary computer and you were storing a lot of photos and a lot of other apps on here, I would definitely recommend getting the largest size in terms of storage that you can, because it really is frustrating to feel like you need to delete things that you would rather not. Finally, in terms of Wi-Fi connection, I personally have never needed anything more than the Wi-Fi connection. In a pinch, I can always connect it to a hotspot, or I tend to be working on it either at home or in a coffee shop that has Wi-Fi. So unless you really need it for whatever reason, I recommend just saving the money and using it either on getting a bigger size or more storage space. So now let's talk a little bit about the stylus. I know it seems like a lot of money to pay $100 for this thin little thing, but I personally find the Apple Pencil to be really worth it. I definitely had that hesitation to spend that much money on a stylus because there's so many other options out there, and you think, oh, maybe one of these will work just as well. But of course, Apple has optimized its iPad Pro to work really well with the pencil. I tried other brands such as Adonit's Jot Pro, the Wacom stylus. The Paper by 53 put out a pencil that was really attractive, but actually wasn't that useful when I actually came to more detailed digital painting, and just generic ones off of Amazon. And finally, when I got the iPad Pro and used it for a little bit, investing in this really turned out to be worthwhile. You'll find when using it with the iPad Pro, especially with Procreate, it's just very intuitive. It feels really natural, like drawing in real life. And the pressure sensitivity and the tilt is just really fine-tuned and dialed in. One other thing that you might want to consider is that some people, especially when transitioning from traditional drawing to digital painting, find the feeling of drawing on glass to be unnatural, and that's something that's off-putting to them. I do find that it might be more of a mental adjustment because now I don't actually use a screen protector and I just draw on the glass, and I find it to feel very natural to me. But I remember feeling that way or thinking that before. So one thing you could potentially look into is there are these paper feel screen protectors that you can buy that gives a little bit of tooth to the experience and makes you feel more like you're drawing on actual real paper. So I'll include a link to that just to give you an example, but also know that I don't use any screen protector and I think it's totally fine. In case you're curious about how to protect your iPad, here is what I use. So this is something I actually got fairly recently. It's a little folio that has a flip top, and then you can put the pencil here, which is actually really convenient because I found that before I would always have it separate or like missing, or sometimes I would forget to bring my pencil case, which is where I was keeping it. And then I also like this because you can fold it in different ways and have it either working like this, so slightly raised, or if you want to watch something and have it raised like this is another option. So this is one thing that I really like. It is a little bit on the heavy side, which I would say is its only con. Before that, I was using just a much slimmer profile case. It was also a smart case, so when you open it, the iPad turned on, and when you close it, the iPad turned off, which is nice. But I dropped it one too many times and it cracked on the corner. The iPad was still safe, so I will say the case is good in that regard. But I figured that since I'm on the go a lot with my iPad, I should get something a little bit more protective, but still has a slim profile. If you're at home a lot and just using the iPad there and don't really worry too much about dropping it, I would actually go for the slimmer case because it's just lighter to use and it'll make your hands less tired, or if you're working on your lap, it's just nicer. And then just get a sleeve. So I was using like a wool sleeve to stick it in if I ever did need to transport it for whatever reason. But those are just what I use. There's a ton of options on Amazon and all the stores. Get what you think looks best or like feels the best for you. But I did a ton of research in this regard, so I just wanted to share my tips there. Lastly, a final quick word on the iPad Pro versus Wacom Cintiq, which is the large desktop tablets that you have probably seen that attach to your computer and work like the Wacom Intuos Pros, but is an actual screen and you draw on top of it. So I remember when I first started out, I was totally envious of these things, but they cost thousands of dollars. So I knew I wasn't going to jump into it right away. I think now, understanding my workflow, I will be investing in one, as I tend to draw these very large digital illustrations, and it would be very nice to be able to have that workspace. That said, I think for a hobbyist or a beginner, the iPad Pro is way better in terms of the value for your money and also convenience. And this might be an obvious point, but the iPad Pro has a lot of other features, so you can use it as an iPad, so you can play games on it and look at photos and be on all your social media. But the desktop Cintiqs are just a drawing tablet, so not talking about the Wacom Mobile Studio Pros, but just the Cintiqs, which are amazing for drawing, but you can't do anything else with it, and they tend to be super big and heavy. So I would almost say they're not really comparable. I would say the large ones are really great for pros and people who really need that kind of power, but when it comes to just having something that's a good investment, high quality, but can do kind of everything well, I would say get the iPad Pro. That is everything in my hardware recommendations section. Let's go into software, where I'll talk about Procreate, Photoshop, and the other apps that I considered before landing on those two as my main workhorses when it comes to my digital painting process. I'll see you there.